All right, we're on the home stretch now, and what we wanted to do just to pause and reflect a little bit about all that we've learned and heard is to put up a second word cloud and get your just thoughts before we turn to our moderators and keynote speaker to get their reflections on the day. So you just need to go to menti.com. If you were here with us yesterday, it would be look familiar to you. And the code is 4218295. So want to encourage you to try it out and let us know what you thought of today's presentation and discussions. And it looks like Kara just shared the code with you as well. If it's not clear on the screen, it may look small for you. So I'm waiting to see what's going to be the first word that's going to pop out on the screen, reflecting today's discussion. Curious to see what that's going to look like.
Hey, Orit.
Yes.
I can see it on my side, but I do not know. Do you think I should just share my Menti screen?
I am not sure if it's you or Kara who are sharing it, but yeah, whatever, however we can all get a view into what everybody's responding with.
There's some really good responses, so 1 second.
Okay, yeah, we would like to see it. And while Mary is getting it all set up so we can see everybody's responses, just to queue up, we were going to ask our moderators from today. So Jim Thorne and Whitney Albright, if you want to get ready to share your reflections from the day. You were moderating conversations, but we want to get your personal thoughts and reflection. And then also hear from Van Santer and your thoughts about the day today. So I'm just cueing you all to get ready and share your thoughts. And the blog is clearly made a large splash today on our conversations. So that's really interesting to see everybody. Urgency is back on the board, all really recognizing that as we see the impacts, there's a need for action and more science, more knowledge to inform our decisions. Biodiversity, adaptation, variability. It's great to see those phrases just kind of popping on the screen. Thanks, Mary. Really appreciate that. Okay, and so now I don't know if you're ready, but I'm just going to call on you, and if you're ready, we'd love to get your thoughts, and we'll start with you, Jim Thorne.
Hi, guys. Wow, what a lot of information to absorb. It was a great series of talks and very stimulating. I found myself in some of the discussions around the second round of presentations thinking about Mike Anderson's comments on the first day when he was tracking climate change events, temperature or precipitation, and saying, look, we have what used to be extreme is now becoming the norm, but we think that it's going to continue going into future trend. And so, the conversation around tipping points ties back to that. It's like we used to think, oh, the extreme event is the event that causes the vegetation to burn, and then the background change in climatic conditions is what drives it to a compositional change of species or of vegetation type. And if those extreme events become the norm, then perhaps we're moving even further along. And I wonder whether we might be able to use that kind of a framework for looking at some of the biological or ecological impacts. I also really liked Louise's comment about performance metrics for gains. And that ties back to David Ackerley's point that we need to be able to, while we can't show the counterfactuals, we need to be able to track what kind of gains we may have made over time with adaptation measures or with ecosystems themselves adapting. And another point that came up for me with Dr. Bograd's presentation was, wow, our marine systems are very dynamic. In fact, and we saw also a couple of presentations yesterday along those lines. And I wonder whether, as we see cascading trophic events that are tied to different types of climate conditions occurring, whether we could use that to make some predictions about what kinds of trophic cascade events could occur on terrestrial systems. So the marine systems are adapting or being impacted perhaps at a faster rate than the terrestrials. And so can we look to that and then make some predictions about what we think will happen on some of our terrestrial sides? So those were a few reflections from listening to the afternoon sessions.
Great, thank you. And Whitney Albright, your thoughts?
Sure, can you see, there we go. Yeah, gosh, like Jim said, a lot to unravel, a lot of really great information to absorb. I was really impressed by just the sheer volume of work, I always am, that's taking place in California, and I feel kind of fortunate to be a part of it. But that said, some of the things that we talked about today are those things that we still don't know a lot about in regards to ecosystems and how they'll respond to climate change over time, the pace and scale of change, and how impacts will unfold on the landscape. That seemed to be a theme that really came up over and over again throughout the past couple of days. What will be some of the indirect impacts of climate change? How will climate change interact with other landscape scale stressors like land use change? We talked about that a little bit in the last session. And what does this all mean, cumulatively? So there's so much that we know, and I'm motivated by that, and also motivated to keep researching because there are so many other questions I think to explore. And all of that is critical information for informing, our management, our conservation efforts. So continued monitoring and research is going to be critical. Thinking about this also came up in our last session, not just where we have long-term baseline data, but where can we continue to study, where can we continue to survey, and we have to have support for that because it's becoming increasingly necessary to create these long-term records. So I'm starting to think about that in the longer term. How can we make sure that this continues to happen? And then another thing that kind of stood out to me is going back to a comment that Dr. Ackerley made this morning. He said that there was, a large diversity in the response of organisms, of humans, of wildlife to climate change. And we saw that again and again throughout the presentations today. Dr. Beisinger emphasized, as he spoke, about how birds and small mammals are being impacted differently. And then even within those, not all birds respond the same way to climate change. There's just an enormous amount of diversity in responses. And it was just a really good reminder because, because of the amazing biodiversity that we have in our state, we are also going to see, an amazing diversity in their responses to climate change, and our conservation actions and our management actions have to reflect that. There won't be a one size fits all. So we ourselves have to be adaptable and resilient, and we have to continue to come together like this and share our stories, our science, our data, our failures, our successes, and keep communicating and keep collaborating. And I think that was very clear, a very clear message that or takeaway that came from these last couple of days for me.
I jump back in. Another thing that I think may be useful for OEHHA and for the climate indicators upcoming report is we have a lot of predictions in different ecosystems and for different types of species and processes from the last several time periods at which this report has been published. So this report is a retrospective that provides context and motivation for moving forward. But in this edition, I think we have an opportunity to realize that, wow, hey, these extreme events are happening and these trophic interactions are happening, and reflect back on what did we predict? What were some of the predictions in these areas? And then are they playing out along the lines that we thought, or do we see differences emerging? And so perhaps we can use this workshop to help to set some of the questions that are covered in the different sections. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks for your reflections. And I want to invite Ben Santer to provide his thoughts. And I believe you have some slides that you have prepared you want to share with us.
Yes, I do.
Great.
Thanks again for the opportunity to be here for these 2 days. This is a picture of my son, Nick, at Joshua Tree National Monument. I went there for the last time a year ago to go rock climbing with Nick. And what I learned today was that with 3 degrees Celsius warming, Joshua Tree could be fundamentally different than it was when we were there last year. That's profoundly sad for me, that this beautiful place could lose its namesake. Here are a few thoughts about the last couple of days. First of all, indicators. So one of the things I've learned over the last 2 days is that climate change is already affecting many aspects of our lives. And it's measurable, it's quantifiable, it's multivariate, it's manifesting on different space and time scales. As we've heard, it's affecting air, land, ocean temperatures, diurnal and seasonal cycles, the intensity and frequency of heat waves, atmospheric moisture, soil moisture, snowpack, timing of runoff. And we've also learned that climate change impacts are measurable. The impacts are in our forests, our soils, our animal, plant, and insect species, agriculture, water availability, human health, fire risk. To me, one of the bottom line messages is that Cal EPA's indicators work is critically important. In my opinion, you can't respond to climate change effectively if you don't understand how climate change is evolving, why climate is changing, the physical processes that are involved in the changes, and what the likely outcomes are for different response strategies. So being able to track both the physical changes in the climate system and their impacts on things we care about is critically important. Reflection 2, we heard a lot about opportunity. I'm not sure whether opportunity made it onto the word cloud. I think it should. California has a real opportunity, as we heard this morning from Secretary Crowfoot, to be a beacon of light for the rest of the country and for the world. Why? I would argue that we can be leaders and are already leaders in advancing climate change science, particularly in terms of understanding the regional and seasonal granularity of climate changes, and looking across a range of different climate models and observations and identifying what in these seasonal and regional details of climate change is robust and physically interpretable. We're also leaders in advancing understanding of climate change impacts on the things that we care about, again, as we've heard in the last 2 days. Cal EPA is a leader in monitoring climate change and its impacts. And what I learned today is that we're also leaders in developing the best integrated response strategies to climate change, to finding some optimal mix of mitigation and adaptation informed by understanding of science, impacts, stakeholder needs, and our basic human values. As Louise Jackson referred to, this is policy and cooperation at all scales, not only at all scales of government, but government, communities, scientists, academia, you name it. We need all of the above in order to manage the best responses to climate change. Another reflection is about communication. I don't think we're going to shift the needle on climate change unless we can communicate effectively about its reality and its seriousness. We heard again from Secretary Crowfoot about the need to distill complex scientific information into plain English, to tell people what we've learned and why it should matter to them, and to communicate not just to our peers, but to those communities we have not been particularly successful in reaching up to now. Again, as Secretary Crowfoot mentioned, we need to be fearless in our communication, as he was with President Trump. There's no point in being a scientist if you're unwilling to defend your hard-fought technical understanding, to speak science to power. And I think too, and there's been some discussion of this today, we need to explain that climate change isn't just a science problem. It's also about human values. What value do we place on the preservation of wilderness, glaciers, Joshua trees, plant and animal species threatened by climate change, the rich cultural heritage of Native Americans? So let's not just talk about science in our communication, but also the basic values that we have and shared values. Just finally, some thoughts about stewardship, inspiration, and thankfulness. Several speakers today mentioned the need to be good stewards of the land and have management strategies that may help us in addressing climate change and sequestering carbon. I'd also ask, how can we be good stewards of the climate system? We need to think about that. Steve, in the last session, in response to the question, what inspired people, noted that stories inspired people, talking about the connections between climate change and people's lives inspires people. So again, let's not just talk about the science, let's talk about those stories, our own shared experiences of climate change in our backyard. Just finally, Secretary Crowfoot spoke about thankfulness, that he was glad he could spend his time finding solutions to an existential crisis for this planet. I strongly share that sentence. I have the extraordinary privilege of going to work every day with brilliant women and men all around the world and to work on a problem that matters to all of us. And I never forget that that is truly a privilege. It's not some inalienable right to do this kind of work. So those are a few random thoughts about the last couple of days. Again, thank you very much for the opportunity to be part of this workshop. And I'm really looking forward to Chris Field's final keynote presentation.
Well, thank you, all of you, for sharing your thoughts, distilling key themes, and really identifying some of the key messages that we heard throughout the workshop, in the presentations, and in the different conversations. Before we actually get to our next keynote speaker, I would like to share with you some of the graphic recordings that have been developed throughout the workshop. And so I'm going to share that. And Addie, if you are available and you want to drop in and say hello to everyone or share any thoughts about your process, would love just for you to just chat Kara and she can let you in. We posted this image at the beginning of the workshop, just kind of starting to think about all the different systems that come together that we want to walk through and identify the interconnections and linkages. And I want to share with you Addie's work for each of the sessions. For the first session, we started with climate change impacts, and she has 3 different representation that she shared. Looks like we talked about the atmospheric rivers. We talked about the importance and our responsibility to Mother Nature, thinking about sea level rise. Then in our second session, we talked about impacts on physical systems. We talked about all the different components represented here. Some of it, some of the writing is quite small, and I cannot read it, so I'm guessing you cannot either, but just wanting to encourage you to go back to Slack and just read in a little bit more detail. Session number 3, we talked about human-related impacts and health-related impacts, and the topic around adaptive capacity came up. Part 4 and 5 today, we talked about vegetation, and then we finished with the last session today about wildlife. So a couple of Joshua trees and wildlife in California. So I just wanted to share that with you and encourage you to go on Slack and review that in more detail. There you are. I couldn't see you because I was sharing. If you want to just share some of your thoughts, we'd love to hear that as well.
Well, the main thing I'll say is keep checking back. I've been listening a great deal and just seeking to bring together ideas. So everything's in draft form at this stage. The blob continues to get larger here in the studio. And it was just really fantastic to listen in on all the wonderful conversations. I invite people to share information back as the pictures develop over time. So it'll be over the next couple of days. You'll see the color versions available.
That's
Thank
great.
you.
It's beautiful. Great work. And in the background, we can see how things are transforming with color. It looks really beautiful too. And the
blob continues to get bigger.
That's great. That's just terrific. Thank you. It's great to see. All right. So now,
I do have a question about that series, and as you know, as you go forward, if people have ideas, then they could share them with you on Slack. Is that right? And you might consider them and how that might modify the pictures.
Absolutely.
So,
in particular, anything people have about the keynotes, as that one's got a lot of room left on it to be developed. And also just, you know, continue to share your thoughts in that graphic recording channel, even if it doesn't make it onto the drawing itself. It's something that we hope to be able to include elsewhere in records. So thank you.